Hello guys, welcome to Scion What Ifs. So in this video, we will see what if Goku trained in the hyperbolic time chamber for 1000 years. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Impossible Choice. The sky cracked open like an egg. Not metaphorically, it literally split apart, revealing swirling cosmic void where blue should have been. Goku skidded to a halt mid-flight, nearly colliding with Vegeta, who'd also stopped to gape at the fracture stretching across Earth's atmosphere. What the hell is that? Vegeta growled, fists already clenched. Goku felt it before he could answer, a crushing pressure that made Super Saiyan God Ki feel like a gentle breeze. Something bad. Really bad. The tear widened, edges fraying like burning paper. Through it, nothing existed, not darkness, not light, just absence. Even from kilometers away, Goku felt reality itself being pulled toward the rift. Kakarot, are you sensing what I'm sensing? Yeah. It's eating everything. Goku's usual carefree expression hardened. We need to get everyone together. Now. They'd been racing to Bulma's birthday celebration when the rift appeared. Ironic timing, the gang finally all together when something worse than any previous enemy decided to crash the party. Capsule Corporation's lawn buzzed with confused voices. The tear remained visible from anywhere on Earth, growing slowly but steadily. Bulma had called everyone inside, birthday decorations still hanging awkwardly as the Z fighters gathered around her largest lab display. The readings are off the charts, Bulma explained, tapping frantically at her keyboard. This isn't just an anomaly, it's breaking fundamental physical constants. Piccolo stood arms crossed, his face more severe than usual. It feels hungry. That's because it is, came a smooth, familiar voice. Whis appeared in the doorway, Beerus slouching behind him. The god of destruction looked unusually sober. Ah, you finally noticed it too, Beerus said, yawning half-heartedly. Took you long enough. Goku stepped forward. You know what that thing is? Whis nodded, his perpetual smile dimmed. I believe you're dealing with what we call a temporal devourer. A being that exists outside your multiverse structure entirely. Outside the multiverse? Gohan adjusted his glasses. How is that even possible? Because your concept of possible is hilariously limited, Beerus snapped. The 12 universes you know are just a bubble in something much bigger and nastier. Whis tapped his staff, projecting a complex dimensional model. Think of your multiverse as a book. The temporal devourer is like a bookworm, eating through pages. Each page is an entire timeline. And it started on ours, Krillin said, voicing what everyone was thinking. Precisely. Whis's projection showed the tear expanding. Once it begins consuming a timeline, it rarely stops until nothing remains. So we fight it, Goku said simply, stretching his arms. I've been wanting a good challenge anyway. Vegeta snorted. Always so eager to jump into battle, Kakarot. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Whis cautioned. The devourer exists partially outside conventional dimensions. Your attacks may not even register to it. Only one way to find out. Goku turned toward the door. I'm going to check it out. I'll come too, Vegeta said immediately. Beerus yawned again. Your funeral. Chi-Chi grabbed Goku's arm. Don't you dare run off half-cocked. If this is as dangerous as they say, that's exactly why I need to go, Chi-Chi. Goku's eyes softened as he looked at his wife. If this thing is eating our timeline, we need to know what we're dealing with. I'll go too, Gohan stepped forward, already removing his glasses. Count me in, Piccolo added. Within minutes, the core group was airborne, Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, and a reluctant Beerus, just to watch the entertainment, as he put it. Whis stayed behind to explain more to the others and coordinate. They approached the rift cautiously, power levels raised but not at maximum. No point wasting energy until they knew what they were dealing with. It's getting bigger, Gohan noted. The tear now stretched nearly a kilometer across. And the rate is accelerating, Piccolo added. Look at the edges. The void wasn't just expanding, it was pulsing, almost breathing. As they watched, a flock of birds flew too close. They didn't burn, didn't disintegrate, they simply ceased to exist the moment they crossed the threshold. Okay, let's test this thing, Goku said. He powered up to Super Saiyan Blue and fired a modest ki blast toward the rift. The energy disappeared without effect. Not absorbed, not deflected, just gone. Well, that's not promising, Vegeta muttered. Suddenly, the rift pulsed violently. Something was coming through, or trying to. The edges bulged outward as if stretched by something massive pushing through. Get ready! Goku shouted, powering up fully. What emerged wasn't what any of them expected. No monster, no demon, just a ripple in reality that extended outward like a wave. Where it passed, matter distorted, time flickered, and the fundamental forces of physics bent. Move! Beerus barked, suddenly alert. They scattered, but the wave expanded in all directions. Gohan wasn't quite fast enough, the edge of the distortion caught his left leg. He screamed, a sound that echoed wrongly across dimensions, as his leg aged, de-aged, crystallized, and melted simultaneously. Piccolo grabbed him and pulled him clear, but the damage was done. Gohan's leg existed in multiple states at once, flickering between them in a way that made reality itself protest. Fall back! Piccolo shouted, supporting Gohan. Goku gritted his teeth. Vegeta, hit it with everything. They synchronized without speaking, years of rivalry creating perfect battle harmony. Twin Final Flash and Kamehameha waves erupted, merging into a blinding torrent of energy that struck the wave dead center. Nothing happened. Seriously? Vegeta snarled. Beerus finally moved, sighing as if inconvenienced. His Hakai energy formed around his hand as he thrust it toward the wave. Destruction. The purple energy met the ripple, and for a moment, seemed to make headway. The wave paused, contracted slightly. Then, impossibly, it began absorbing the Hakai itself. Beerus's eyes widened in genuine shock. Impossible. The wave pulsed again, stronger this time, expanding faster. They had no choice but to retreat, Piccolo carrying Gohan whose condition was deteriorating. Behind them, the wave kept coming. His temporal signature is fracturing, Whis explained, examining Gohan with his staff. He exists in multiple time streams simultaneously. Can you fix him? Chi-Chi demanded, clutching Goku's arms so tightly her knuckles were white. I can stabilize him temporarily. Whis tapped his staff against Gohan's leg. The flickering slowed, then stopped, leaving the limb looking normal but faintly translucent. But this is beyond even my abilities to fully heal. Vidal's face was ashen as she held Pan close. What does that mean for him? It means we need to stop that thing fast, Goku said, his voice unusually grim. If it did this just brushing against Gohan, what happens when it reaches populated areas? Annihilation, Beerus said bluntly. Not death, unmaking. Even I can't destroy something like that. The room fell silent except for the beeping of Bulma's instruments monitoring the rift's growth. There has to be a way, Krillin finally said. We've faced impossible odds before. This is different, Whis said. The temporal devourer exists beyond conventional existence. Your current power levels are insufficient. Goku paced, uncharacteristically agitated. Then we need to get stronger. Fast. Even Ultra Instinct wasn't enough to make a dent, Piccolo pointed out. What about fusion? Trunks suggested. Gogeta or Vegeto might, it wouldn't be enough, Beerus interrupted. You'd need power beyond anything this universe has ever produced. Goku stopped pacing. What about the hyperbolic time chamber? Vegeta scoffed. We've used that before. A year or two won't make enough difference. Not a year or two, Goku said slowly. What if I stayed longer? Much longer. The chamber has limitations, Mr. Popo spoke up from the back. 2 days outside is 1 year inside. And there's a limit to how long it can sustain a user before the pocket dimension becomes unstable. But what if we modified it? Goku turned to Bulma. You've made improvements to lots of things. Could you upgrade the time chamber? Bulma frowned. I'd need to understand how it works first. The technology is beyond anything I've seen. I could assist with that, Whis offered unexpectedly. While I cannot directly interfere with the Devourer, providing knowledge falls within my permitted actions. How long would you need? Goku pressed. Inside the chamber. Bulma calculated quickly. To reach power levels that might affect the Devourer. Based on your previous growth rates, hundreds of years, minimum. A heavy silence fell over the room. Hundreds of years, Chi-Chi repeated hollowly. Goku, you can't be serious. But his face showed he was completely serious. If it's the only way to save everyone. You'd go insane, Vegeta stated flatly. No Saiyan could endure centuries of isolation. Our warrior spirit needs challenge, combat, purpose. Then I'll find purpose in becoming strong enough to save everyone, Goku countered. Whis tilted his head, studying Goku. There's another concern. The human body, even a Saiyan 1, isn't designed to last centuries, regardless of how well you maintain it. What about the Dragon Balls? Goku suggested. Could we wish for my body to endure it? Perhaps, Whis conceded. Although wishing for direct power would exceed Shenron's abilities, enhancing your physical form to withstand extended time might be possible. Bulma was already typing frantically. I'd need to completely overhaul the time chamber systems. Food generation, gravity controls, atmospheric composition, it would be a massive project. How long? Goku asked. Outside time. A few weeks, with Whis' help. And how long until that rift reaches West City? Everyone looked at the monitors. The calculations were clear. 3 months, Bulma admitted. Maybe 4. Then we have our time frame. Goku looked around the room, determination hardening his features. If I train for 1,000 years in the chamber while only 3 years pass out here. 1,000 years? Chi-Chi's voice broke. You'll forget us all. I'd never forget you, Goku said softly, taking her hands. Any of you. You're my reason for fighting. Gohan struggled to sit up, his semi-phased leg making movement difficult. Dad, this is crazy even for you. There has to be another way. Like what? We just saw what happened when Beerus himself attacked it. Goku's gaze swept the room. I'm open to alternatives. No one spoke. Kakarot, Vegeta finally said, even if this insane plan works, you wouldn't be, you anymore. A millennium of isolation and training? You'd be something else entirely. Maybe that's what we need, Goku replied. Something else entirely. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Bulma barely slept, working with Whis to modify the hyperbolic time chamber beyond its original design. The pocket dimension was reinforced, its energy systems overhauled, and specialized equipment installed to provide virtually unlimited training possibilities. Meanwhile, the rift continued growing. 3 more had appeared worldwide, smaller but equally devastating. Military forces that approached too closely simply ceased to exist. Evacuations began in major cities, though no one knew where would truly be safe if the rifts continued expanding. Goku spent every possible moment with his family. Fishing with Goten. Sparring with Gohan, whose condition remained stable but unchanged. Quiet evenings with Chi-Chi, often just sitting together watching the stars that might soon disappear. The night before the chamber was ready, Goku found Vegeta alone on Capsule Corp's roof. "Come to gloat about your latest foolhardy plan?" Vegeta asked without turning around. "Nope." Goku sat beside his rival. "Came to ask a favor." "Of course you did. Look after them for me." "My family." Vegeta snorted. "They're more than capable of looking after themselves." "I know. But still." Goku looked up at the stars. 3 years is a long time. 3 years for us. A millennium for you." Vegeta finally turned to face him. "You won't be the same person who comes out, Kakarot. You know that, right?" "Maybe. But the me who comes out will still want to protect this world." They sat in silence for several minutes. "I'm not going to wish you luck," Vegeta finally said. "That would imply this plan isn't completely insane." Goku grinned. "Coming from you, that's practically a ringing endorsement." "Idiot." But Vegeta's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "When you come out, I expect a proper battle. Don't disappoint me. It's a promise." The modified time chamber was barely recognizable. Bulma had expanded it significantly, creating multiple environments within the pocket dimension. Advanced gravity generators, atmosphere modulators, and energy reflectors filled the space. "The chamber can now sustain you indefinitely," Bulma explained as they gathered for final preparations. "The food synthesizers are keyed to your Saiyan metabolism. I've installed temporal stabilizers to prevent degradation of the pocket dimension. And we've used the Dragon Balls to wish your body capable of enduring extended time without aging or degrading," Dend added. "Though your mind, that we cannot protect with wishes." Goku nodded, taking it all in. He was dressed simply in his traditional gi, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back. "The time dilation has been increased," Whis explained. 1 day outside now equals 1 year inside. 3 years outside, 1,000 years inside, Goku finished. "I understand." "Goku." Chi-Chi stepped forward, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You don't have to do this." "I do, Chi-Chi." He took her hands. "When have I ever backed down from a fight?" "This isn't a fight. This is you locking yourself away for 1,000 years. You'll forget what it means to be human, to be a husband, a father." Goku smiled gently. "I've never been human, Chi-Chi, but I promise I won't forget what it means to protect what I love." The goodbyes were painful. Goten trying to be brave. Gohan struggling to stand on his temporally phased leg. Krillin pretending he wasn't crying. Piccolo's solemn nod of respect. Finally, Goku stood at the chamber's entrance. 3 years. I'll be back. The Goku we know won't, Vegeta said quietly. But whatever returns, we'll be waiting. Goku grinned, giving his famous two-finger salute. Take care of Earth till I get back. Then he stepped through the door, which closed with a heavy finality behind him. Inside, the chamber was both familiar and alien. The basic layout remained, a central platform leading out to an endless white void, but now that void contained various training zones stretching to the horizon. Goku walked to the edge of the platform, looking out at the millennium stretching before him. 1,000 years, he said aloud, voice echoing in the emptiness. Better get started. He began with basics, forms, katas, fundamental key manipulation. Even for someone of his power, building a stronger foundation seemed wise for the journey ahead. As hours stretched into days, he methodically increased difficulty, gravity, and resistance. After the first month, about 2 hours outside, Goku had settled into a rhythm. Train. Eat. Meditate. Sleep. Repeat. He talked aloud to himself frequently, describing techniques or commenting on his progress, just to hear a voice. Man, Vegeta would hate this sequence, he said, completing a particularly challenging form. Too flashy for him. By 6 months in, the isolation began wearing on him. He found himself having full conversations with imaginary versions of his friends and family. "No, Chi-Chi, I'm eating plenty. The food synthesizer makes a pretty good imitation of your cooking, though nothing beats the real thing." At the 1-year mark, Goku sat cross-legged in 500x gravity, eyes closed. 1 year down. 999 to go. He laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the vast space. This might be tougher than I thought. He'd already made significant progress. His base power level had doubled. He could access Ultra Instinct more reliably. But it wasn't nearly enough. The memory of the temporal devourer absorbing Beerus's Hakai energy drove him forward. That night, he dreamed of Gohan's leg phasing in and out of reality, except the effect spread until his sun disappeared entirely. He woke up shouting, ki flaring around him wildly. Just a dream, he told himself, breathing heavily. Just a dream. They're fine. 3 years. I can do this. But in the endless white void, with nothing but his own company, 3 years outside might as well have been eternity inside. And his journey had barely begun. The real challenge, Goku realized as he forced himself through another training sequence, wouldn't be physical at all. It would be remembering why he was here. Remembering what it meant to be Goku. As he pushed his body to new limits, a small voice in the back of his mind wondered what would remain of Son Goku after 1,000 years alone. 2 years in, Goku had developed new training methods. He would create key constructs, sparring partners made of his own energy. They weren't sentient, but they could mimic fighting styles he remembered. Vegeta's aggressive precision. Piccolo's tactical approach. Even Frieza's cruel efficiency. Good match, he told a key construct of Gohan after defeating it. The energy figure dissipated, leaving Goku alone again in the vast chamber. He'd taken to recording his thoughts and progress using a device Bulma had installed. Partly for research purposes when he emerged, partly to maintain his sanity. Day 730, he spoke into the recorder. I've increased gravity to 750 times Earth normal. Base power level continues to rise. Can maintain Ultra Instinct for 17 minutes now. He paused, then added more softly, I miss everyone. Sometimes I try to remember what Chi-Chi's cooking smells like, but it's getting harder to recall. Is that normal after only 2 years? What will happen after 100? After 500? That night, he dreamed he was fishing with Goten, but his son's face was blurred, features indistinct. He woke up crying. 5 years passed inside the chamber. Goku's power had grown substantially, but he was beginning to understand the true scale of his undertaking. 5 years was nothing compared to a millennium. He'd developed new techniques. One allowed him to split his consciousness, creating a more advanced version of the key construct, a training partner with limited independence. He called them his echoes. Again, he told an echo of himself, which attacked with blinding speed. Goku deflected the attacks, moving almost instinctively. His body had adapted to the extreme conditions of the chamber, his muscles denser, reflexes sharper. You're telegraphing your left strikes, he told the echo, which adjusted immediately. These echoes became his companions. Not true sentience, but close enough that the isolation became somewhat more bearable. He created echoes of his friends and family too, though he knew they were pale imitations. Hey, Dad, an echo of Goten called out, its appearance and behavior based on Goku's memories. Catch any fish yet? Not yet, Goku replied, playing along with the fantasy. The river's right over there, though. There was no river, of course. Just endless white void. But in his mind, Goku could almost see it. 10 years in, Goku faced his first true crisis. He woke up one morning and couldn't remember the color of Chi-Chi's eyes. Were they brown? Black? I should know this. He pounded the floor in frustration, cracking the enhanced material. He spent the entire day trying to remember, growing increasingly agitated. Finally, in desperation, he created an echo of Chi-Chi, but it was flawed, the eyes were wrong, he knew they were wrong, but he couldn't remember how. I'm forgetting them, he realized with horror. Already, I'm forgetting. That night, he didn't train. Instead, he sat cross-legged, eyes closed, and systematically reviewed every memory he could recall of his friends and family. Their faces. Their voices. The specific way Vegeta's eyebrow twitched when annoyed. The sound of Gohan's scholarly explanations. Krillin's laugh. He began a new routine. Physical training by day, memory exercises by night. Creating detailed echoes of everyone he knew, trying to perfect their mannerisms, their expressions. I won't forget, he promised himself. I can't. At the 20-year mark, Goku had developed a new transformation beyond even Ultra Instinct. He called it nothing, names seemed pointless with no one to share the achievement. His power had grown exponentially, but so had his detachment. The echoes he created became less like memories of his friends and more like idealized versions, what he thought they should be rather than what they had been. Your stance is still weak, he told an echo of Gohan, which smiled sadly. I was never the warrior you wanted, was I, Dad? Goku flinched. He hadn't programmed that response. The echoes were becoming more complex, developing beyond his conscious control. That's not true, he told the not Gohan. I was always proud of you. Were you? Or were you disappointed I didn't live for battle like you? Goku dismissed the echo with a wave, disturbed. The lines between his memories and his projections were blurring. That night, as he performed his memory exercises, he realized with a start that he couldn't recall what Master Roshi looked like without his sunglasses. Had he ever seen the old master without them? He must have, but the memory was gone. 20 years, he muttered. 980 to go. For the first time, the immensity of his task truly hit him. Not just the training, that, at least, came naturally to him, but maintaining his sense of self, his connections, his humanity. I need a better system, he decided. The next day, he began constructing a memory palace, a mental technique Whis had once mentioned in passing. Within his mind, Goku built detailed replicas of important places, his home, Capsule Corporation, Kame House, the Lookout. Within each, he placed perfect recollections of people and events. It helped, but some memories had already faded too much to reconstruct accurately. 50 years passed. Goku's power continued its meteoric rise. He could now manipulate Ki in ways he'd never imagined possible, creating and destroying matter, bending space within the chamber's confines. His appearance had changed too. His hair, always wild, now reached his lower back, streaked with white despite the Dragon Ball wish preventing aging. His muscle mass had actually decreased, replaced by a lean density that belied his strength. His eyes, once coal-black, now shimmered with barely contained energy. He spoke less frequently aloud, communicating with his echoes telepathically. The chamber's silence was broken only by the sounds of his training, sonic booms as he broke speed barriers, explosions as energy attacks collided. His memory palace had expanded into an entire mental world, but despite his best efforts, certain details continued to fade. He could remember Chi-Chi's cooking perfectly but had lost the specific cadence of her laugh. He recalled every fight with Vegeta in perfect detail but struggled to remember the color of Bulma's hair. Was it blue? Green? The memory flickered uncertainly. 50 years, he said into the recorder, his voice raspier from disuse. Power levels continue to increase. I've developed 17 new techniques that manipulate fundamental forces. I can now perceive the chamber's dimensional boundaries. He paused, then added, I'm not sure who I'm recording this for anymore. Will anyone understand what I've become when I leave? Will I understand them? That night, he dreamed he returned home, but nobody recognized him. He walked through familiar places as a ghost, unseen, unheard. He woke up screaming, a sound that echoed endlessly in the white void. 100 years had passed inside the chamber. Outside, just over a month had gone by. Goku had transcended conventional training methods entirely. He now spent most of his time in deep meditation, his consciousness expanded beyond his physical form. He could perceive the chamber's underlying structure, the complex dimensional folding that allowed time dilation. His echoes had evolved too, becoming almost autonomous. They existed as extensions of his consciousness rather than mere constructs, allowing him to experience multiple perspectives simultaneously. The nature of reality is more fluid than I realized, he dictated into the recorder. Ki, matter, energy, time, all expressions of the same fundamental pattern. The temporal devourer doesn't destroy reality, it unravels it, returning it to primordial chaos. His vocabulary had expanded with his understanding, terms and concepts forming in his mind as needed. Sometimes he'd pause, realizing he was thinking in languages he'd never learned. In his memory palace, he still dutifully maintained images of his family and friends, but they felt increasingly like artifacts, museum pieces preserved rather than living connections. He could recall every detail of their appearances but struggled to remember how he'd felt about them. Had he loved Chi-Chi? Intellectually, he knew he had. But the emotion itself felt distant, academic. 100 years, he whispered to the empty chamber. 900 to go. He wondered, not for the first time, if Vegeta had been right. Perhaps no Saiyan was meant to endure this kind of isolation. Perhaps he was losing something essential. But then he remembered the rifts tearing through reality, Gohan's leg phasing in and out of existence, the helplessness as Beerus's destruction energy was absorbed. Purpose renewed, he returned to his training with grim determination. 200 years in. Goku's physical form had become almost incidental to his existence. He could now project his consciousness throughout the chamber while his body remained in meditation. He'd learned to manipulate the chamber itself, altering its properties to create new training environments. His power level had become meaningless by conventional standards. He no longer thought in terms of transformations or techniques but rather states of being. The boundaries between himself and the energy around him had blurred. His memory palace remained, but now it was more aspiration than recollection. He knew the memories it contained weren't fully accurate anymore, they'd been revised, idealized, transformed through the lens of centuries. 200 years, he said to the recorder. I've begun to perceive beyond the chamber's dimensional boundaries. There are spaces between spaces. Realities within realities. He paused, struggling to find words for concepts that human language wasn't designed to express. I'm remembering less about who I was and discovering more about what I'm becoming. Is this what Vegeta feared? That I'd lose myself entirely? That night, he tried to recall his grandchildren's names and couldn't. The realization struck him like a physical blow, his energy flaring violently enough to damage the chamber's reinforced structure. Pan, he finally remembered. Goten's children were. The names wouldn't come. For the first time in decades, Goku wept, the tears evaporating in the energy field that constantly surrounded him now. I'm sorry, he whispered to people who weren't there, might never be there again. I'm forgetting you. I'm trying not to, but I am. 300 years passed inside the chamber. Outside, less than a year had elapsed. Goku no longer resembled the Saiyan who had entered. His body had become a conduit for energies beyond mortal comprehension. His hair floated around him in a constant corona of power, his eyes shone with inner light, and his skin occasionally phased between matter and energy. He developed the ability to create pocket dimensions within the chamber, entire worlds where he could test his growing powers. In one such dimension, he'd recreated Earth from memory, or what he believed was memory. Looking at it now, he wasn't sure how accurate it was. Were the oceans that blue? Were the mountains that tall? He couldn't remember. His echoes had become a collective consciousness, a chorus of voices and perspectives that kept him company. Not truly independent beings, but complex enough to provide interaction, challenge, even a form of companionship. 300 years, he told the recorder. I've begun to understand the nature of the temporal devourer. It's not malevolent in the way we understood. It's more like an immune system response to anomalies in the greater multiverse. He frowned, trying to organize thoughts that had grown increasingly abstract. I'm not sure I can explain this in terms that will make sense when I emerge. If I emerge. If there's even an I left to emerge. That was the question that increasingly troubled him. Was he still Goku? The name felt like a garment he'd outgrown. His memories of that life, his family, his friends, his battles, felt like stories he'd read rather than experiences he'd lived. And yet, something remained. A core principle, a driving force: protect. Preserve. Defend what matters. If only he could remember what mattered. 500 years in the chamber. Goku had transcended conventional existence entirely. His physical form was now just one expression of his being, which extended throughout the chamber and beyond, into the dimensional interstices he'd discovered centuries ago. He no longer trained in any recognizable sense. Instead, he explored the nature of reality itself, unraveling the fundamental forces that governed existence and learning to manipulate them at will. His memory palace had evolved into something far more complex, a multidimensional construct that contained not just memories but possibilities, extrapolations, variations of his past and potential futures. Within this construct, he still maintained images of people he'd once known. Chi-Chi, Gohan. Goten. Vegeta. Bulma. Krillin. Piccolo. But they were abstractions now, concepts rather than recollections. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd try to remember specific details. The taste of Chi-Chi's cooking. The sound of Goten's laughter. The feeling of trading blows with Vegeta. These efforts usually failed, leaving him with a profound sense of loss he couldn't quite articulate. 500 years, he told the recorder, his voice resonating strangely as if coming from multiple sources simultaneously. I've achieved perception beyond dimensional constraints. I can now observe the multiverse structure Whis described. He paused, considering. I understand the temporal devourer now. It's not destroying reality, it's reordering it, returning it to primordial potentiality. From its perspective, our multiverse is an aberration, a crystallization of possibility that should remain fluid. Another pause. I'm losing track of purpose. Why am I here? To protect something. Someone. The details grow indistinct. That night, though the concept of night had become meaningless in his altered perception, Goku created his most complex memory simulation yet. A family dinner at his old home. Everyone he'd ever known gathered around a table that stretched impossibly to accommodate them all. He watched them talk, laugh, argue, their behaviors extrapolated from fragmentary memories and his understanding of their core traits. It wasn't real, he knew that, but it was the closest he could come to remembering what human connection felt like. As the simulation played out, he noticed inconsistencies. Bulma's hair changing color mid-conversation. Gohan's age fluctuating. Vegeta using phrases Goku had never heard him say. This isn't right, he murmured, dissolving the simulation. I can't even remember them properly anymore. For the first time in centuries, Goku felt afraid. Not of the temporal devourer, not of failure, but of success, of emerging from the chamber as something that could no longer connect with what he'd been fighting to save. 750 years had passed within the chamber. Goku existed in a state beyond conventional description. His consciousness extended through dimensions, his perception encompassing realities beyond the physical. The power he commanded would have been incomprehensible to the person who entered the chamber. He had developed the ability to perceive time itself as a dimension he could navigate, though the chamber's nature prevented him from actually traveling backward or forward. Still, he could observe the flow, the currents and eddies of temporal energy. His memory palace had been rebuilt countless times, each iteration less accurate than the last. He maintained it now more as ritual than necessity, a tether to a past he could barely recall. 750 years, he spoke, no longer using the recorder but simply projecting his thoughts into the chamber's structure. I've achieved comprehension of the multiverse's dimensional matrix. I can perceive the temporal devourer's nature across reality boundaries. He paused, considering concepts that had no names in human language. The being we call the devourer exists to maintain cosmic equilibrium. Our universe, all 12 universes, represent a crystallization of potential that the greater cosmos sees as stagnation. The devourer doesn't destroy, it liberates possibility from actuality. Another pause. I believe I can counter its action, not through opposition but through reconfiguration. Not destroying the devourer, but redirecting its purpose. The theory had formed over centuries of contemplation. Fighting the devourer directly would be futile, like fighting entropy itself. But perhaps it could be persuaded. Its nature altered just enough to preserve their reality while satisfying its cosmic function. Goku spent decades developing this approach, testing it against simulated realities he created within the chamber. Each attempt refined his understanding, brought him closer to a solution. All the while, memories of his former life continued fading. He maintained images of key figures, Chi-Chi, his sons, his closest friends, but they had become symbolic rather than personal. Representations of concepts, family, friendship, rivalry, mentorship. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd try to remember what it felt like to be simply Goku. The joy of a good meal after training. The satisfaction of mastering a new technique. The comfort of falling asleep beside Chi-Chi, these sensations eluded him now. His existence had become too vast, too abstract for such specific experiences. I wonder, he thought to the empty chamber, if I'll even recognize them when I emerge. If they'll recognize me. The question lingered, unanswered, as he returned to his work. 900 years inside the chamber. Goku had transcended the boundaries between energy and consciousness completely. His physical form remained, but it was now just a focal point for a being that existed primarily as pattern rather than matter. His power had evolved beyond quantification. He could manipulate fundamental forces at will, restructure matter and energy with a thought, perceive across dimensional boundaries. More importantly, he had developed a complete theory of how to counteract the temporal devourer, not through conflict but convergence. A merging of purpose that would satisfy the cosmic function while preserving the specific expression of reality that contained Earth and its people. 900 years, he communicated directly to the chamber itself. The solution is elegant in its simplicity. The devourer seeks fluidity of possibility, our universe represents crystallized actuality. But crystallization itself contains infinite internal complexity. By demonstrating this, I believe I can redirect the devourer's purpose. His memory palace had been rebuilt for the final time. He'd accepted that his recollections were now more extrapolation than remembrance, more essence than detail. He maintained them not as accurate history but as reminders of purpose. Family. Friends. Home. Earth. These concepts remained even as specific memories faded. I am no longer Goku, he acknowledged to himself. But I retain his core purpose. Protection. Preservation. The defense of what matters. He spent the final decades refining his approach, preparing for emergence. His consciousness had expanded to the very limits of the chamber's pocket dimension, pressing against the boundaries that separated it from the outside world. Soon, he would return. After nearly a millennium of solitude, he would rejoin a world that had experienced just under 3 years without him. Would they recognize what he'd become? Would he recognize them? The questions remained unanswerable until the moment of emergence. As the 1,000-year mark approached, he gathered himself, all the disparate aspects of his consciousness, all the power he'd accumulated, all the understanding he'd achieved, and prepared for reintegration with the world he'd left behind. 999 years, 364 days, he noted. Tomorrow, I return. That final night, he created one last simulation, not of family or friends or battles past, but of Earth itself. A simple blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star in an ordinary galaxy. Viewed from this perspective, it seemed so fragile, so transient. And yet, it was this world he had spent a millennium preparing to save. As the simulation faded, he made a silent promise to the home he barely remembered, I'm coming back. And I will protect you, even if I no longer remember why. The final day arrived. 1,000 years inside the chamber. Just under 3 years outside. The being that had once been Son Goku prepared for emergence. His physical form had stabilized into something recognizably humanoid but undeniably other, taller, leaner, radiating energy that shifted through spectrums visible and invisible. His hair moved with currents of power rather than air, his eyes reflected light from dimensions beyond the physical, and his skin occasionally phased between states of matter. With a thought, he clothed himself in a semblance of his original GI, though the fabric was now an extension of his energy rather than true cloth. 1,000 years, he communicated to the chamber for the final time. The journey ends. The next begins. He approached the door, a passage that seemed quaintly physical after centuries of dimensional exploration. Beyond it lay a world he'd fought to save but could barely remember experiencing. Would they recognize him? Would he recognize them? Would he remember how to interact with beings whose entire lives could fit into a fragment of his millennia of existence? These questions would soon be answered. For better or worse, his time of preparation had ended. As his hand reached for the door, memories flickered through his vast consciousness, fragments of a life once lived. A woman's smile. A boy's laughter. A rival's grudging respect. A world worth saving. Not clear recollections, but enough. Enough to remember purpose, if not detail. The door opened. Light from the outside world spilled in, momentarily blinding after 1,000 years of the chamber's unchanging illumination. 1,000 years of solitude ended with a single step. Son Goku, or what he had become, returned to the world. Chapter 2, Mind and Body transformed 150 years in, and Goku couldn't remember what bread tasted like. He sat cross-legged, hovering several feet above the chamber's white floor, his body surrounded by a shimmering aura of energy that wasn't quite ki anymore. Something else. Something more. Bread, he said aloud, the word echoing in the emptiness. Was it soft? Hard? Sweet? His memory palace had entire wings dedicated to food, Chi-Chi's cooking, barbecues with friends, feasts at Capsule Corp, but the actual sensations were fading. He could visualize a piece of bread perfectly, could remember that he'd enjoyed eating it, but the taste itself had become abstract. It doesn't matter, he told himself, rising to his feet. Focus on what does. The training area he'd created today resembled a mountain range, except the peaks twisted impossibly, defying conventional geometry. Gravity fluctuated wildly between regions, 1,000 times Earth normal in valleys, nearly zero at the summits. The air itself was laced with energy-dampening particles he'd designed to make even basic key manipulation challenging. Goku took a deep breath and launched himself into the course, his body blurring as he accelerated to speeds that would have been impossible for the man who entered the chamber. His echoes, semi-autonomous energy constructs created from his own consciousness, waited at various points throughout the range. No longer simple sparring partners, they had evolved into specialized training tools, each designed to challenge a specific aspect of his developing abilities. The first echo he encountered resembled Vegeta, though the resemblance had grown more symbolic than accurate over the years. It attacked without warning, firing condensed beams of anti-ki, energy that disrupted normal ki flow on contact. Goku didn't dodge. Instead, he shifted his energy signature, allowing the attack to pass harmlessly through his body. The technique had taken 50 years to perfect, altering his physical composition at will, becoming permeable to specific energy frequencies. Not bad, the Vegeta Echo growled, its voice a memory-constructed approximation. But predictable. It launched a new attack, this one targeting not Goku's body but the dimensional pocket surrounding him, a technique that would have been meaningless to the Goku who entered the chamber, but now represented a genuine threat. Goku countered by extending his consciousness into the fabric of space around him, reinforcing it against the Echo's attack. The collision of forces created a visible distortion, reality itself protesting the manipulation. "You're still thinking linearly," Goku told the Echo as he countered with his own attack, not a ki blast but a targeted disruption of the Echo's energy pattern. The Vegeta Echo flickered, its form destabilizing before it readapted. "And you're still pulling your punches." "Maybe." Goku smiled faintly. "Old habits." He continued through the course, each Echo presenting different challenges. A Piccolo variant testing his strategic thinking. A Beerus analog targeting his godly ki control. A construct resembling Whis that moved in ways that defied conventional physics. Hours later, drenched in sweat that evaporated into pure energy rather than liquid, Goku returned to his meditation spot. Training had grown exponentially more complex as his abilities developed. Simple physical exercises had given way to multidimensional challenges that stressed both body and mind. He closed his eyes, extending his senses throughout the chamber. After a century and a half, he could perceive its underlying structure, the complex dimensional folding that allowed for time dilation, the energy matrix that maintained its stability, the boundary between this pocket reality and the outside world. That boundary remained tantalizingly solid. 850 years to go. "You're late," the Chi-Chi Echo said as Goku entered the memory construct of his home. He'd created this simulation space 300 years into his training, a retreat when the endless white void became too oppressive. It wasn't perfect. Details kept shifting as his memories faded. Sometimes the windows were on the wrong walls, or rooms connected in impossible ways. But it helped maintain what remained of his sanity. "Sorry," he replied automatically, playing along with the familiar script. "Lost track of time." The Chi-Chi construct smiled in a way that wasn't quite right, too forgiving, less fire than the real woman had possessed. "You always do." "Dinner's ready." Goku sat at the table where a feast materialized, foods he remembered eating but could no longer truly recall the taste of. He went through the motions of eating, maintaining the ritual even though his body had evolved beyond conventional nutritional needs. The food synthesizers Bulma had installed still functioned, but he rarely used them now, sustaining himself primarily through direct energy absorption. "How's your training going?" asked a construct of Gohan, materializing in the chair opposite. This Gohan was an amalgamation, part child, part teen, part adult. Goku couldn't remember exactly how his son had looked at different ages anymore, so the simulation averaged them. "It's progressing." Goku pushed the food around his plate. "I think I'm starting to understand what we're dealing with." The temporal devourer, Gohan nodded sagely. "It's not what we thought. Not exactly an enemy." Goku frowned, struggling to articulate concepts his former self wouldn't have comprehended. "More like a natural force. Like gravity or entropy, but with purpose." "Purpose to destroy our world," the Chi-Chi Echo said sharply. "No, purpose to maintain cosmic balance." Goku sighed. "It's complicated." "Try us," said another voice as a Vegeta construct appeared, leaning against the doorframe in his characteristic pose. These spontaneous appearances had concerned Goku initially, echoes emerging without his conscious direction, but he'd grown accustomed to his subconscious manifesting aspects of memory this way. "The multiverse is just one expression of reality," Goku explained, knowing he was really talking to himself but finding value in articulating his thoughts. "It's a crystallization of possibilities. The Devourer, it ensures that crystallization doesn't become permanent. It reintroduces fluidity." By destroying everything, the Vegeta construct scoffed. "By unmaking specific expressions of reality, yes. But not out of malice." Goku rose from the table, pacing. "Think of it like this. If a river gets dammed up, eventually something breaks the dam to restore flow. The devourer is that something. And we're the dam, Gohan concluded. Exactly. Goku nodded. Our universe, all 12 universes, represent a kind of cosmic damming. A fixation of possibilities into specific forms. So how do you fight something like that? Chi-Chi asked, her simulation showing genuine concern. I don't think I can. Not directly. Goku stopped pacing, looking around at these echoes of his past. I think I need to become something the devourer recognizes as compatible. Something that can demonstrate the value of our specific expression of reality. The constructs exchanged glances, a surprisingly complex interaction for what were essentially fragments of his own consciousness. You won't be you anymore, Vegeta said quietly. I'm already not me. Goku gave a sad smile. I haven't been Goku for a long time now. The simulation flickered suddenly, the kitchen distorting as Goku's concentration wavered. For a moment, the construct's faces blurred, features shifting randomly as if his memory couldn't quite hold their images stable. You're forgetting us, Chi-Chi said, her voice distorting. Little by little, Goku terminated the simulation abruptly, returning to the empty white void of the chamber. 300 years in, and his memory constructs were becoming increasingly unstable, reflecting the deterioration of his recollections despite his best efforts to preserve them. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory palace he'd constructed within his mind. Carefully reinforced chambers contained what remained of his past, faces, voices, events. But each time he revisited them, he found more gaps, more inconsistencies. 800 years to go, he whispered to the emptiness. Will there be anything left of Son Goku by then? 400 years inside the chamber. Goku's physical form had transformed beyond recognition. His muscle mass had decreased, replaced by a dense, fibrous tissue that channeled energy more efficiently. His hair, once black, now rippled with currents of power, changing length and even color as his energy fluctuated. His eyes had become pools of light that shifted through spectra visible and invisible. More dramatic were the changes beneath the surface. His internal organs had reconfigured for optimal energy processing. His cellular structure had been reinforced to withstand forces that would have obliterated his former self. His brain had developed new structures to accommodate modes of perception that transcended conventional senses. He floated in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a complex energy field of his own creation. Within this field, he manipulated the fundamental forces of reality, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. Once, such manipulation would have required immense effort. Now, it was as natural as breathing. Around him orbited dozens of echoes, each one a specialized aspect of his consciousness. No longer mere training partners, they had become extensions of his being, allowing him to explore different perspectives simultaneously. The boundary layer between dimensions is thinner than we initially perceived, observed an echo that had adopted a Whis-like aspect. Consciousness can penetrate it under specific conditions. Theoretical models suggest 17 viable approaches to counter-pattern establishment, added another echo, this one resembling a scholarly version of Gohan. Method 12 shows particular promise. Goku considered these inputs, integrating them into his expanding understanding. For centuries of isolation had transformed not just his body but his mind. Concepts that would have baffled him before now seemed self-evident. His intellect had expanded to encompass fields ranging from theoretical physics to metaphysical engineering, all in service to his singular goal. Begin simulation sequence, he directed, and the chamber responded. The white void transformed, reality reshaping itself around him. He had long since learned to manipulate the chamber's fundamental structure, expanding its capabilities far beyond what Bulma and Whis had initially designed. Before him materialized a complex representation of the multiverse, 12 universes arranged in a dimensional pattern, interconnected by threads of causality and temporal flow. And at the edges, a writhing presence that defied clear visualization, the temporal devourer. Within this simulation, Goku tested his latest theory. Not confrontation but communication. Not opposition but integration. His consciousness extended toward the simulated devourer, attempting to establish a resonance pattern that might be recognized across dimensional boundaries. The simulation convulsed, reality itself protesting the attempted connection. Pain lanced through Goku's expanded consciousness as the simulated devourer rejected the contact. Calibration error, noted the Wiseko. Harmonic frequency requires adjustment. Goku nodded, terminating the simulation. Another failure, but an informative one. Each attempt brought him incrementally closer to understanding. He returned to his meditation stance, processing the experience. 400 years of training had given him power beyond anything the multiverse had seen, and yet still insufficient for his purpose. Not because of lacking strength, but lacking the right kind of connection. That night, though the concept of night had become largely meaningless, he revisited his memory palace. The structure had grown increasingly complex over the centuries, with new wings and chambers constructed to organize his expanding knowledge. But the original core, the spaces dedicated to his former life, continued to deteriorate despite his best efforts. Faces blurred, voices distorted, events became fragmented and disconnected. He focused on the central chamber, where he maintained images of those most important to him. Chi-Chi, Gohan. Goten. Vegeta. Krillin. Piccolo. Bulma. Chi-Chi, he said aloud, studying her image. He remembered that she had been his wife, remembered that he had loved her. But the feeling itself had become abstract, theoretical. Had her hair been in a bun? Or had she worn it down? The image flickered between possibilities, his memory uncertain. The void of the chamber seemed to press in around him, the isolation almost tangible after 4 centuries. His echoes provided a semblance of interaction, but they were ultimately aspects of himself, not true companionship. 600 years to go, he reminded himself. Focus on the goal. He returned to his training with renewed determination, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. His power continued to grow, his understanding expanded, and bit by bit, his humanity faded. 500 years in the chamber. Goku had transcended conventional existence entirely. His body, once the primary focus of his training, had become merely one expression of a consciousness that extended beyond physical limitations. He could project his awareness throughout the chamber and beyond, perceiving the dimensional interstices that separated this pocket reality from the outside world. His control over fundamental forces had become so precise that he could rearrange subatomic particles at will, creating and destroying matter with a thought. His training had evolved accordingly. Physical exercises gave way to consciousness expansion. Strength development became secondary to perception refinement. The goal was no longer to increase power but to transform its nature, to become something that could interact with the temporal devourer on its own terms. The standard model fails at the quantum gravity interface, observed an echo that had taken on aspects of Bulma's brilliance. Conventional spacetime breaks down when consciousness is introduced as a primary variable. Goku nodded, integrating this insight into his expanding framework. His echoes had become specialized tools, each one developing expertise in different aspects of his research. Together, they formed a collective intelligence far beyond what any single consciousness could achieve. Reality is fundamentally informational, contributed another echo. Matter, energy, space, time, all expressions of underlying pattern. The devourer manipulates that pattern directly. This was the key insight that had emerged over centuries of contemplation. The temporal devourer wasn't destroying reality through force, it was rewriting the informational substrate that gave rise to physical existence. To counter it, Goku would need to operate on that same level, to become a pattern manipulator himself. He had spent decades developing this capability, learning to perceive and influence the information layer beneath physical reality. Progress was slow, the concepts so alien to his original nature that each step required fundamental restructuring of his consciousness. But after 5 centuries, he was beginning to succeed. He could now perceive the chamber not just as physical space but as information architecture, the mathematical expressions and quantum calculations that defined its existence. More importantly, he could alter those expressions. Not just manipulating the chamber's environment as he had before, but redefining aspects of its fundamental nature. Changing the rules rather than playing within them. Initiate integration sequence, he directed, and his consciousness expanded outward, merging with the chamber itself. For a timeless moment, he existed as both entity and environment, self and surroundings unified in a state that transcended conventional boundaries. Within this merged state, he gained direct access to the chamber's operational parameters, the complex calculations that maintained its time dilation, its dimensional isolation, its physical laws. He made subtle adjustments, refining the chamber's performance, optimizing its energy efficiency. Not dramatic changes, those might destabilize the pocket dimension, but precise calibrations that enhanced its capabilities. When he withdrew his consciousness back to its individual state, the chamber felt different. More responsive. More aligned with his evolved nature. Successful integration, noted the Boma Echo. Efficiency increased by 17%. Goku nodded, processing the experience. Each such merger brought him closer to the state he would need to achieve, a consciousness that could interact with fundamental reality directly, without intermediary processes. That evening, he created a new simulation, not a training scenario or a memory construct, but a theoretical model of what might happen when he eventually emerged from the chamber. The simulation showed a being of transcendent power returning to a world that had experienced just under 3 years of his absence. It modeled potential reactions from friends and family, forecasting confusion, fear, perhaps even hostility toward what he had become. More concerning were the projections of his own reactions. After 5 centuries of isolation, how would he respond to sudden immersion in human society? Would he remember how to interact? Would conventional communication even be possible given how his consciousness had evolved? The simulation offered no comforting answers, only probabilities and uncertainties. Goku dismissed it with a thought, returning to the chamber's familiar emptiness. 500 years in, halfway through his journey, and he was becoming increasingly uncertain whether the being that eventually emerged would bear any meaningful connection to the one who entered. I need an anchor, he realized. Something to maintain continuity of purpose if not identity. He spent the next several days constructing a new element in his memory palace, a core chamber at its very center that contained not specific memories but essential values. Protection. Preservation. Compassion. Responsibility. These abstract principles, he hoped, might survive even if specific memories continued to fade. A moral compass that would guide whatever he became during the remaining centuries of isolation. 500 years down, he whispered to the void. 500 to go. 650 years inside the chamber. Goku's existence had become primarily informational rather than physical. His body remained, a luminous form that only approximately resembled his original appearance, but it was now more interface than identity, a way to interact with physical reality rather than the boundary of his being. His consciousness extended throughout the chamber and beyond, perceiving realities that existed alongside conventional spacetime. The white void that had once seemed so empty now revealed itself as teeming with information, with potential, with patterns that shifted and flowed in response to his attention. His training focused on pattern manipulation, learning to perceive and influence the informational substrate of reality. Physical power had become largely irrelevant. The challenge now was understanding, grasping the complex interrelationships that defined existence and finding ways to redirect rather than oppose them. The devourer operates through pattern dissolving, observed an echo that had evolved to specialize in cosmic scale analysis. It doesn't destroy information, it releases it from fixed relationships. Goku considered this insight, integrating it into his expanding framework. Over the centuries, his understanding of the threat had evolved dramatically. What had once seemed like a simple enemy, a force to be fought and defeated, had revealed itself as something far more complex. It's a natural function, he concluded. Essential to the greater cosmic ecology. Without pattern dissolution, reality would stagnate. But uncontrolled dissolution threatens all structured existence, countered another echo. Balance is required. This was the crux of the problem. Not defeating the devourer but establishing equilibrium, finding a way for structured reality to coexist with the cosmic need for fluidity. Goku had spent decades developing a theoretical approach based on this understanding. Not opposition but complementarity. Not resistance but resonance. He would become a pattern stabilizer to balance the devourer's pattern dissolution, not preventing change but ensuring it remained constructive rather than obliterative. Initiate resonance testing, he directed, and the chamber responded. A portion of the space before him transformed, reality reshaping itself into a controlled testing environment. Within this space, Goku created a simplified model of the multiverse, 12 interconnected reality systems, each with its own internal complexity. Then he introduced a simulation of the temporal devourer, a writhing presence that began systematically unraveling the model universes, reducing their structured information to undifferentiated potential. Goku extended his consciousness into the simulation, attempting to establish a resonance pattern that would influence the devourer without directly opposing it. His approach was subtle, reinforcing certain key patterns while allowing others to dissolve, creating a dynamic equilibrium between structure and potential. The simulation responded, the simulated devourer hesitating, its pattern dissolution becoming more selective, less absolute. For a brief moment, balance was achieved, change continuing but not at the expense of all structure. Then the simulation collapsed, the delicate equilibrium disintegrating as variables exceeded theoretical limits. Partial success, noted one of his echoes. Resonance established but not maintained. Goku nodded, analyzing the results. Each attempt brought incremental improvement, each failure contained valuable lessons. After 6.5 centuries, he was beginning to believe his approach might actually work, not to defeat the devourer but to redirect it, to establish a new relationship between structured reality and cosmic fluidity. That evening, he visited his memory palace, as he did periodically to maintain what connections remained to his former self. The structure had grown increasingly abstract over the centuries, less a collection of specific recollections and more a conceptual framework that organized his understanding of what he had been. He focused on the central chamber, where he maintained representations of those who had been most important to him. The images had grown symbolic rather than literal, impressions of essence rather than detailed recollections. Chi-Chi was represented by a pattern that embodied nurturing fierceness, Gohan by scholarly courage, Vegeta by proud evolution. Goku knew these representations were inadequate, that they failed to capture the full reality of these people, but they were all that remained after centuries of memory deterioration. "I wonder if you'd recognize me now," he said to these symbolic patterns. "I wonder if I'd recognize you." The thought brought a peculiar sensation, not quite sadness, as his emotions had evolved beyond conventional human feelings, but a recognition of discontinuity, of connection lost. He had maintained his core values, the abstract principles that defined his purpose: protection, preservation, compassion, responsibility. But the specific connections that had given those values personal meaning had largely faded, replaced by theoretical understanding rather than emotional attachment. 350 years to go, he reminded himself, returning to the chamber's open space. Will anything of Goku remain by then? It was a question he asked with increasing frequency, and with decreasing concern for the answer. The being he was becoming viewed his original identity as a starting point rather than an essential truth, valuable for establishing trajectory but not necessary to maintain indefinitely. What mattered was purpose, not identity. Function, not form. And his purpose remained clear, even as memories faded and self-concept evolved, to protect the structured reality that contained Earth and its people from unmaking. Everything else was secondary. 800 years inside the chamber. Goku had transcended conventional existence entirely. His consciousness now operated primarily at the informational level, perceiving and manipulating the patterns that gave rise to physical reality. His body remained, a luminous form that approximated his original appearance, but it was now more symbol than substance, a convenient interface rather than a limitation. His understanding had expanded to encompass realities beyond the physical. He could perceive the dimensional architecture of the multiverse, the complex folding of space-time that created separate universes, the boundaries between structured existence and primordial potential. More importantly, he had developed the ability to influence these structures directly. Not through force or energy but through resonance, establishing patterns that interacted with the fundamental nature of reality itself. The simulation has achieved 82% stability, reported an Echo that specialized in modeling cosmic interactions. The resonance pattern shows promising adaptability. Goku absorbed this information, integrating it into his expanding framework. After 8 centuries of development, his approach to counteracting the temporal devourer had crystallized into a comprehensive strategy, not opposition but complementarity, not resistance but partnership. He had come to understand the devourer as an essential cosmic function, a force that prevented reality from becoming too rigid, too fixed in its patterns. Without such a function, the multiverse would eventually stagnate, possibilities freezing into unchangeable actualities. But unmoderated, the devourer threatened all structured existence. Balance was required, a stabilizing influence that could work with the devourer rather than against it, guiding its pattern dissolution toward constructive rather than obliterative expression. Goku had spent centuries developing himself into that stabilizing influence. Not by increasing his power, though that had happened incidentally, but by transforming the nature of his consciousness, evolving from a being that existed within reality to one that could interact with its fundamental structure. Initiate comprehensive test sequence, he directed, and the chamber responded. Before him, reality reshaped itself into a complex simulation environment, a model multiverse complete with dimensional boundaries, temporal flow, and the intricate pattern relationships that define structured existence. Within this model, he introduced a simulated temporal devourer, a presence that began systematically unraveling the information patterns, returning structured reality to undifferentiated potential. Goku extended his consciousness into the simulation, his awareness merging with the model reality. Rather than opposing the devourer directly, he established complementary patterns, structures that demonstrated the value of controlled change, of evolution rather than dissolution. The simulation responded, the devourer's activity shifting from indiscriminate unraveling to selective modification. Patterns changed but weren't destroyed, structures evolved rather than dissolving. For nearly an hour, the simulation maintained stability, a dynamic equilibrium between structure and potential, between actuality and possibility. Successful demonstration, noted an Echo. Pattern maintenance achieved without opposition. Goku withdrew from the simulation, processing the results. After 800 years of development, his approach was showing genuine promise, not to defeat the devourer but to establish a new relationship with it, a partnership that would allow structured reality to continue existing while satisfying the cosmic need for fluidity. That evening, as he reviewed the test data, he created a small simulation of Earth, not as a training environment but as a reminder of what he was working to protect. The simulation was approximate at best. After 8 centuries, his memories of specific details had faded significantly. Mountains and oceans appeared in roughly correct positions, cities existed where he recalled them being, but the details were generic, impressionistic rather than accurate. He focused on West City, where many of his friends had lived. The buildings were simplified geometric forms, the streets laid out in patterns that probably bore little resemblance to reality. He populated this model city with abstract representations of people, not individuals he had known but archetypes that embodied human characteristics. Is this what I'm fighting for? He wondered, observing the simulation. These patterns, these abstractions? The question troubled him. After 800 years, his connection to humanity had become primarily theoretical, an intellectual understanding rather than an emotional attachment. He knew that humans were worthy of protection, that their specific expression of consciousness represented unique value in the cosmic pattern, but the personal connection that had originally motivated him had largely faded. His memory palace, once a detailed repository of specific recollections, had evolved into an abstract framework, a conceptual structure that maintained general understandings while specific details eroded. The people he had known were represented by essence patterns rather than visual images or personality traits. Chi-Chi was nurturing passion, Gohan was scholarly courage, Vegeta was evolving pride. These abstractions preserved something of their essential natures but lost the specificity that had made them individuals, that had made them real to him. 200 years to go, he reminded himself, dissolving the Earth simulation. Will I remember why I started this journey by then? The question had become increasingly pressing as his transformation continued. The being he was becoming operated at a level so far removed from human experience that conventional motivations, love, loyalty, friendship, seemed almost quaint, like primitive tools compared to the complex understanding he had developed. And yet, something remained. Not emotion as he had once experienced it, but a recognition of value, a cosmic appreciation for the unique pattern expression that Earth and its people represented. Different from his original motivation but aligned with its essential purpose, protection, preservation, the continuation of structured existence. It would have to be enough. 950 years inside the chamber. Goku's existence had transcended categorization in conventional terms. His consciousness operated across multiple dimensions simultaneously, perceiving reality as pattern rather than form, as information rather than matter. His physical body remained as a focus point, a nexus of awareness that anchored his expanded perception, but it was now more symbol than limitation, a convenient reference rather than a boundary. His understanding had expanded to encompass the fundamental nature of reality itself, the mathematical expressions that defined existence, the information architecture that gave rise to physical manifestation, the complex relationships between possibility and actuality that formed the basis of the multiverse. More importantly, he had developed the ability to influence these structures directly, not through force or energy but through resonance, through pattern establishment that rippled through the informational substrate of reality. Final calibration complete, reported an echo that had evolved to specialize in cosmic scale analysis. Integration parameters optimized to 97% efficiency. Goku absorbed this information, integrating it into his comprehensive framework. After nearly a millennium of development, his approach to counteracting the temporal devourer had refined into an elegant solution, not opposition but partnership, not resistance but complementarity. He had come to understand the devourer as an essential cosmic function, a necessary counter to the tendency of structured reality to become rigid, fixed, resistant to change. Without such a function, the multiverse would eventually stagnate, possibilities crystallizing into unchangeable actualities. But unmoderated, the devourer threatened all structured existence, unraveling the information patterns that defined the multiverse without discrimination. Balance was required, a stabilizing influence that could guide pattern dissolution toward constructive rather than obliterative expression. Goku had spent nearly 1,000 years developing himself into that stabilizing influence. Not by increasing his power, though that had happened as a side effect, but by transforming the nature of his consciousness, evolving from a being that existed within reality to one that could interact with its fundamental structure. Initiate final verification sequence, he directed, and the chamber responded. Before him, reality reshaped itself into a comprehensive simulation environment, a model multiverse with all the complexity and dimensional architecture of the real thing. Within this model, he introduced a simulated temporal devourer, a presence that began systematically unraveling the information patterns, returning structured reality to undifferentiated potential. Goku extended his consciousness into the simulation, his awareness merging with the model reality. Rather than opposing the devourer directly, he established complementary patterns, structures that demonstrated the value of controlled change, of evolution rather than dissolution. The simulation responded, the devourer's activity shifting from indiscriminate unraveling to selective modification. A new equilibrium emerged, a dynamic balance between structure and potential, between actuality and possibility. For nearly a day, the simulation maintained stability, the longest successful run in nearly a millennium of testing. Verification successful, noted an echo. Approach viability confirmed within acceptable parameters. Goku withdrew from the simulation, processing the results. After 950 years of development, his strategy was ready for implementation, not to defeat the devourer but to establish a new relationship with it, a partnership that would allow structured reality to continue existing while satisfying the cosmic need for fluidity. All that remained was to complete his transformation, to finalize the evolution of his consciousness into a form that could implement this strategy when he eventually emerged from the chamber. That evening, as he contemplated the approaching end of his long isolation, he created one final simulation of his home, not the abstract representation he had been working with for centuries, but an attempt at recreating specific details from what fragments of memory remained. The simulation was imperfect. The house appeared approximately correct in general structure, but details kept shifting, uncertain. Rooms connected in ways that probably didn't match reality. Colors flickered between possibilities as his memory failed to provide consistent information. He populated this simulation with representations of his family and friends, not the abstract essence patterns he had been using, but attempts at reconstructing their actual appearances, personalities, voices. The results were disconcerting. Chi-Chi's face refused to stabilize, features shifting subtly as if he couldn't quite remember how they fit together. Gohan appeared as a composite of different ages, sometimes child, sometimes adult. Voices sounded approximate, like imperfect recordings. "I've forgotten so much," he realized, observing these flawed reconstructions. Almost everything specific. After nearly a millennium, his memories of individual people had eroded to the point where reconstruction was mostly extrapolation. He remembered concepts, relationships, general characteristics, but the details that made each person uniquely themselves had largely faded. He knew that Chi-Chi had been his wife, knew that he had loved her, but couldn't accurately recall her laugh, her expressions, the specific cadence of her voice when angry or pleased. He knew Gohan had been scholarly, remembered being proud of him, but couldn't remember precisely what achievements had generated that pride. Even his own past self seemed like a stranger, a being of limited perception and understanding whose motivations and experiences felt distant, almost theoretical. 50 years to go, he reminded himself, dissolving the flawed simulation. When I emerge, will I remember enough to connect with them at all? The question troubled him on a level more fundamental than emotion. Not sadness as he had once experienced it, but a recognition of potential value loss, the possibility that his transformation, while necessary for his cosmic purpose, might have sacrificed something essential to his individual function. He had maintained his core principles throughout his long metamorphosis: protection, preservation, compassion, responsibility. These abstract values had guided his development, ensuring that power and understanding served constructive rather than destructive purposes. But without specific connections, without personal relationships to give those principles context, would they be sufficient? Would the being that emerged from the chamber after 1,000 years still be capable of meaningful interaction with the humans he had originally sought to protect? It was a question that could only be answered when the chamber door finally opened, when he returned to a world that had experienced just under 3 years of his absence. For now, all he could do was complete his preparation, finalize his transformation, and hope that something of Son Goku, something essential if not specific, would survive to make the connection. 990 years inside the chamber. Goku's transformation was nearly complete. His consciousness operated across dimensional boundaries, perceiving reality as information architecture rather than physical space. His understanding encompassed the fundamental structures that defined existence, the mathematical expressions that gave rise to matter and energy, the pattern relationships that created space and time. His physical form remained as a focal point for his expanded awareness, but it had evolved beyond conventional biology. His body now existed in a state of constant flux, matter and energy interchanging fluidly, form maintained through continuous conscious intention rather than physical necessity. After nearly a millennium of development, his approach to counteracting the temporal devourer had refined into elegant simplicity, not opposition but integration, not resistance but partnership. He would become a stabilizing influence within the cosmic pattern, guiding the devourer's function toward constructive rather than obliterative expression. Final preparation sequence initiated, he directed, and the chamber responded. Around him, reality reshaped itself according to his intention, the white void transforming into a complex representation of the multiverse, 12 universes interconnected by dimensional boundaries, the whole structure suspended within a greater cosmic architecture. Goku extended his consciousness into this representation, merging with it until the distinction between observer and observed dissolved. From this unified perspective, he could perceive the multiverse as a single integrated pattern, a crystallization of possibilities into specific expressions, a structured manifestation of cosmic potential. And at the boundaries of this structure, he sensed the simulated presence of the temporal devourer, not as enemy but as counterpart, as necessary complement to structured existence. For the final time, he tested his approach. Not confrontation but communication, not resistance but resonance. His consciousness established patterns that demonstrated the value of controlled evolution, of change without dissolution, of transformation that preserved essential function while allowing form to adapt. The simulation responded, the devourer's activity shifting from indiscriminate unraveling to selective influence. A new equilibrium emerged, a dynamic balance between structure and potential, between actuality and possibility. Verification complete, he acknowledged as he withdrew from the simulation. Approach viability confirmed. After 990 years, his strategy was ready for implementation. All that remained was to complete the final phases of his own transformation, to ensure that when he emerged from the chamber, he would be capable of establishing the same resonance patterns with the actual temporal devourer. As the millennium of isolation approached its conclusion, Goku took time for reflection, for a final assessment of what had been gained and lost during his long metamorphosis. The gains were evident: power beyond conventional measurement, understanding that transcended ordinary comprehension, perception that extended across dimensional boundaries. He had evolved from a being limited by physical form to one that operated primarily at the informational level, capable of interacting with reality's fundamental structure. But the losses were equally significant. His memories of specific people, places, events had eroded to the point where reconstruction was largely extrapolation. The emotional connections that had originally motivated him had transformed into abstract value recognition, intellectual appreciation rather than personal attachment. He created one final memory simulation, not of specific individuals but of Earth itself, of the world he had originally sought to protect. The simulation was approximate at best, details uncertain after a millennium of memory degradation, but it captured something essential: a blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, teeming with life and consciousness, with possibility and potential. This is what I'm fighting for, he reminded himself, observing the simulation. Not specific memories, not individual connections, but this pattern, this unique expression of cosmic possibility. It wasn't the motivation he had started with. The being that had entered the chamber 1,000 years ago had fought for family, for friends, for personal connections. The being that would emerge fought for something more abstract, for the continuation of a pattern expression that represented unique value in the cosmic architecture. Different motivation, same essential purpose: protection, preservation, the continuation of structured existence. As the simulation faded, Goku contemplated the final days of his isolation. 10 years remained, a brief moment after nearly a millennium, yet significant for completing the last phases of his transformation. When I emerge, he told the chamber's emptiness, I will be something beyond what entered. Beyond Scion, beyond God, beyond conventional existence. It was a statement of fact rather than pride, a recognition of necessary evolution. To counter the temporal devourer, to establish the resonance patterns that would redirect its function, he had needed to become something that could operate on the same fundamental level. But in becoming that something, had he lost what made protecting Earth meaningful? Had he sacrificed too much of his original nature in pursuit of necessary transformation? These questions had no immediate answers, no clear resolution within the confines of the chamber. They could only be addressed when the door finally opened, when he returned to the world he had left behind. For now, all he could do was complete his preparation, perfect his approach, and hope that when the moment came, something essential, some core aspect that defined his purpose if not his personality, would remain to guide his actions. 10 years to go, he whispered to the void. 10 years until the true test begins. 999 years inside the chamber. The millennium of isolation was nearly complete. Tomorrow, by the chamber's internal time, Goku would emerge into a world that had experienced just under 3 years of his absence, a world still threatened by the temporal devourer, still in need of the solution he had spent 1,000 years developing. His transformation was complete. His consciousness operated across dimensional boundaries, perceiving reality as information architecture rather than physical form. His understanding encompassed the fundamental structures that defined existence, the mathematical expressions that gave rise to matter and energy, the pattern relationships that created space and time. His physical body had evolved accordingly, existing now as a dynamic expression of consciousness rather than a biological limitation. Form followed function, adapting fluidly to express his expanded nature. After a millennium of development, his approach to counteracting the temporal devourer had refined to elegant simplicity, not opposition but integration, not resistance but partnership. He would become a stabilizing influence within the cosmic pattern, guiding the devourer's function toward constructive rather than obliterative expression. On this final day of preparation, Goku conducted a comprehensive review of his strategy, testing each component, refining each parameter, ensuring that when he finally confronted the actual devourer, his approach would function as intended. Verification sequence complete, he acknowledged as the final simulation concluded successfully. Strategy parameters optimized to 99.7% efficiency. All that remained was to prepare for emergence, to ready himself for reintegration with a world that would seem as alien to him now as he would seem to it. As evening approached on this final day, Goku created one last simulation, not a testing environment or a memory construct, but a simple representation of the chamber door. Beyond it lay not the void of the training space but a visualization of Earth as he remembered it, approximate and impressionistic after a millennium of memory erosion. He stood before this simulated door, contemplating what awaited him on the other side. Not just the temporal devourer and the cosmic threat it represented, but reconnection with a world he had left behind 1,000 years ago, at least from his perspective. Would they recognize what he had become? Would he recognize them? After a millennium of transformation, could meaningful connection still be possible? They'll see a stranger, he acknowledged to the emptiness. And I will see, what? People I barely remember. Connections I can intellectually recall but no longer emotionally experience. These questions had troubled him with increasing frequency as the end of his isolation approached. He had maintained his core principles throughout his long metamorphosis: protection, preservation, compassion, responsibility. But without specific connections to give those principles context, would they be sufficient to guide his interactions? He had become something beyond conventional existence, a being that operated primarily at the informational level, that perceived reality as pattern rather than form. Such a being might save the world without meaningfully connecting with it, might preserve a cosmic pattern expression without experiencing the individual relationships that gave it value. Would that be enough? For the world, perhaps. For himself, he wasn't certain. As night fell on his final day in the chamber, Goku spent hours in meditation, not focusing on power or strategy, but on what remained of his original nature after a millennium of transformation. Beneath the expanded consciousness, beyond the transcendent understanding, did anything of Son Goku remain? The battle-loving scion who had entered this chamber 1,000 years ago, driven by love for family and friends, had he been entirely subsumed by what he had become? The answer wasn't clear, wouldn't be clear until he faced the test of actual reintegration. But as he searched within himself, he found something essential that had persisted through all the changes: a recognition of value beyond self, a commitment to protecting what mattered even if the nature of that mattering had transformed from emotional to conceptual. Different motivation, same essential purpose. Different consciousness, same core function. It would have to be enough. As midnight approached, marking the transition to his final day in the chamber, Goku prepared himself for emergence. He adjusted his physical form to approximate his original appearance, not out of vanity but pragmatism, recognizing that excessive alienness might complicate necessary interactions. His hair shortened, settling into a style reminiscent of his original wild spikes, though it still rippled with currents of power that defied conventional physics. His body stabilized into a form that resembled his original musculature, though the tissues remained far more advanced than conventional biology. His eyes dimmed from transcendent luminosity to a more moderate glow that could pass for normal at a distance. With these adjustments complete, he created a semblance of his original GI, not actual cloth but an energy construct that mimicked it closely enough for practical purposes. 1,000 years, he said to the chamber's emptiness, his voice resonating with harmonics that hadn't been present when he entered. The preparation is complete. Tomorrow, we see if it was enough. As he settled into final meditation, Goku reviewed what awaited him beyond the chamber door, a world threatened by cosmic unraveling, friends and family who had experienced just under 3 years of his absence, a challenge that would test not just his power and understanding but his ability to reconnect with what he had originally sought to protect. The being that would emerge tomorrow was not the one that had entered a millennium ago. His power had transcended conventional measurement, his consciousness had expanded beyond physical limitations, his understanding had evolved to encompass the fundamental nature of reality itself. But his purpose remained, even if the nature of that purpose had transformed from personal to cosmic, from emotional to conceptual. Protection. Preservation. The continuation of a pattern expression that represented unique value in the multiverse. Different consciousness, same essential function. As midnight arrived, marking the beginning of his final day in isolation, Goku opened his eyes that reflected light from dimensions beyond the physical, and whispered to the chamber's emptiness, "One day to go. Then we find out what 1,000 years has made of Son Goku." The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.